New questions about the political and legal peril facing President Trump as an explosive week wraps up. Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who worked on Trump's transition team, is now raising this warning.
Bob Mueller is not what should concern the president or the White House. That's the Southern District of New York. What they're doing, I'm confident, is building a case for two things. One, to go after those around the president who may have committed crimes. And two, to build a case, if they have one, I don't think they have one at the moment, but if they were trying, they're trying to build one against the president for when he leaves office.
Joining me now, Democratic strategist Zach Friend. He worked on Obama's presidential campaign, and nationally syndicated columnist Adriana Cohen, also a Boston Herald radio host. Thank you both for joining us this morning. Zach, give me some context here. How remarkable is this idea that prosecutors could be building a case to bring against the president after he leaves office?
In some respects, it's totally unprecedented. And I'll say this, too. Governor Christie tried to clarify those remarks the next day, which seems to be a pretty common theme here among the administration, the president himself, and even their surrogates, is that within about 24 hours, they try and walk it back. But within the first 24 hours, I think that's when you get the actual truth out of them. And I think that Governor Christie was really telling you what's coming down the pike. You know, Mr. Cohen really has provided a blueprint for the prosecution. I think that one of the real concerns of the president is what happens post-presidency. And I think that he's really exposed himself and a lot of his surrogates and even some of his family to some serious legal issues.
Adriana, the New York Times' Maggie Haberman tweeted about Christie's remarks, saying this is something several Trump advisors believe, and they see it as part of a personal rationale for seeking a second term. So, Adriana, does this line up with what you're hearing?
No, I don't think so, because President Trump has always wanted a second term. He's never said otherwise. He's also actively fundraised, from the get-go, raising over $130 million his first 2 years for the re-election campaign. And so seeking a second term was always something he wished to do. I don't think it's because he's trying to avoid prosecution, after he leaves office, although I think his family members will have to be concerned about them being targeted, unfortunately. And I agree with Zach. I mean, this is just unprecedented that we would have a system of justice that would be pursuing a president and his family members and his associates. We didn't see this with Hillary Clinton. Well, she wasn't president, but with the Clintons, Bill Clinton. We didn't see this with Barack Obama or virtually any prior president. And so it feels like an inquisition, and I think it could potentially turn off a lot of voters.
Well, we are in uncharted waters, though. Zach, former Trump attorney Michael Cohen gave investigators a lot of new material this week. Here's just a few of the noteworthy moments that we had to see. Let's take a watch.
The President of the United States thus wrote a personal check for the payment of hush money as part of a criminal scheme to violate campaign finance laws. A lot of people have asked me about whether Mr. Trump knew about the release of the hacked documents, the Democratic National Committee emails, ahead of time. And the answer is yes. I lied to Congress when Mr. Trump stopped negotiating the Moscow Tower project in Russia. I stated that we stopped negotiating in January of 2016. That was false. Our negotiations continued for months later during the campaign.
Zach, what were your biggest takeaways from that?
Well, I mean, my biggest takeaway, again, is that he's really just provided a blueprint for for prosecution moving forward. I mean, I got to say that one of the reasons why the previous administrations didn't have this kind of cloud over them is because they weren't, caught up in such a web of lies. One of the things that I don't know, though, is whether this ultimately will have any impact on the re-elect. I think that a lot of people's opinions on Mr. Trump, on President Trump, are baked. And I think that what I don't know is how this will play across some of the states that ultimately will determine this election through the industrial Midwest. Although I got to say, I mean, it's remarkable to sit here and watch somebody this close to the President of the United States provide this kind of testimony, and to have so many people that are this close to the President of the United States really turning against him to provide this kind of information. This is just something that I think will be part of the history books.
During that testimony, we saw Republicans take aim at Michael Cohen's character. During that hearing, he has, of course, admitted to lying in previous testimony. Do you have any doubts about the reliability of what he said this week, Zach?
I don't. I used to work in law enforcement, and I got to say the entire justice system is actually based upon people who are con men and criminals actually turning against each other. If you think about it, it's not normally people that are clean that are actually involved in this kind of activity. So just because he was convicted of or has pled guilty to lying to Congress doesn't necessarily mean that he's not a witness that can actually provide this kind of information. That is, in many respects, what the justice system is built upon, and I think that he provided some testimony that's really damaging.
Adriana, what were your thoughts as you saw that?
I disagree because he's a totally discredited witness. Michael Cohen was convicted on 8 counts in a federal courtroom for lying, tax evasion. It goes on and on. He's a convicted felon, and it shows just how desperate Democrats are that they would roll out this star witness who's a criminal and who's going to be a federal inmate in a couple of months as someone that we can trust to tell the truth. He's a known perjurer, and so I don't think many voters who are watching this, national spectacle are going to take any credence in anything he has to say. He's basically just trying to reduce his sentence, so he's, kissing up to people who want to go after Donald Trump. He's basically their patsy. I agree with Jim Jordan on this. He's just being used to lower his sentence, and so I don't think many voters are going to trust a convicted felon to tell them the truth.
An article in the Washington Post looked at the Republicans' focus on going after Michael Cohen instead of trying to defend President Trump. It reads, "Truthfully, it is tough to ignore some of the gross immoral behavior by the president," said one senior House Republican who requested anonymity so that he could speak frankly. The reason there was no defense is because there is no defense. Is there any reason to doubt that this widespread sentiment, given how this hearing played out? Adriana.
Well, I just think, Americans want a basic sense of fairness in our country. And we didn't see Democrats going after, Hillary Clinton for campaign violations. I mean, for example, the Clinton campaign and the DNC funded the dirty dossier. That wasn't accurately reported to the FEC. They laundered that donation through Perkins Coie. And so why aren't people, the justice system, going after them for federal election violations? Yet they want to, target President Trump, for the Stormy Daniels situation or the Karen McDougal. It's just a total imbalance in our justice system, and I think it's dangerous. And I think ultimately voters want fair play. If you're going to hold one party accountable to the rules to the nth degree, well, you have to do that to the other members of the party. And so that's the big disconnect we're seeing right now.
Zach, I want to play another clip for you from that Cohen hearing. We'll talk about it on the other side. Let's take a listen.
How many times did Mr. Trump ask you to threaten an individual or entity on his behalf?
Quite a few times.
50 times?
More.
100 times?
More.
200 times?
More.
500 times?
Probably. Over the 10 years.
Over the 10 years, he asked you.
And when you say threaten, I'm talking with litigation or an argument.
Zach, you work for the Obama campaign here, the DNC, the House, and the Senate. So it's fair to say you have a pretty solid frame of reference for just how striking that exchange was. What was your reaction to that?
I mean, in some respects, it's almost pathetic to think that you could have somebody who purports to be as powerful as the President of the United States claims he was before he was the President of the United States, using his attorney to be basically his intimidator because he couldn't even do it himself. I mean, this is somebody who is actually contacting schools he attended so that they wouldn't release SAT information. I mean, I just don't really see this as, I agree with Adriana that this is ultimately something in the voters component of it, and I don't know that it's necessarily going to have an impact on the vote, but this is bigger than this. I mean, is this really the kind of democracy that we're seeking? Do we really want a president of the United States that's caught up in this amount of a web of lies and surrounds himself? I mean, if you believe that Mr. Cohen is not a credible witness, as my colleague here is saying, then why did the president surround himself with him for so long? Why is every single person that's been associated with the President of the United States, indictments, guilty charges, on and on and on. You didn't see this in the previous administrations. The reason that there weren't these investigations in the previous administrations is because they weren't corrupt like this. I mean, this is a crazy thing that's going on right now in the country, and I think that we should at least take a step back and recognize that we need some sense of sanity moving forward.
Real quickly, I wanted to get Adriana's reaction to what Zach just said.
Well, I can tell you that, again, Michael Cohen is a liar. So when he says that, President Trump directed him to, intimidate people, I say prove it. Michael Cohen has admitted to taking private recordings of the president's conversations he's had with the president. We'll prove it. Show us an email. Show us some real hard evidence that what he's saying is true. Otherwise, we should just discount it as just more lies from a convicted perjurer.
All right, Adriana Cohen, we appreciate your perspective this morning. Zach Friend, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Breaking barriers, why